I was having a conversation with a friend earlier this evening, right before the show. That's one of the reasons I'm a little bit late for this show. Just 2 minutes, 3 minutes late for this show. Oh, can you tell I was eating commissary cake? My teeth are green. That's from the icing. So I was having this conversation with a friend prior to the show, and he asked me, "How's your Sunday going? Hope it's great." And I said, "You know what? I'm having the best day. Like Sunday is my first day of I can't get past how green my teeth are. Sunday is my first day of the week. It's the Lord's Day. I can get a lot of things done because the phone's not ringing because it's not a weekday. And I wake up at 5 in the morning. I pray the Lisansu on Kandit, have my 8 a.m. show, do some cleaning, cooking, working, church. I even was able to take a nap. So I'm doing just great. And I cannot imagine what life must be like for people who are involved in politics with the election being 6 weeks away. It's got to be this constant grind and this stress that I do not miss whatsoever. And so in the context of all things, in like I'm living a life in the private sector where you know things are going all right and I've got a rhythm going. I'm sober, I'm going to church. I mean, I'm loving life, not because there are riches or or like lots of happy things are happening. I'm loving life because it is, and I have enjoyed today very much. Welcome to the new week. This is the Troy Torres Show, the evening show on Candid. It is now 7:37 p.m. on Sunday, June 14, 2026, and I can tell that I'm getting into a groove and a rhythm on Candid because uh, by the grace of God, I'm able to juggle several different large issues and investigative reporting at the same time. Like, I really hope a typhoon does not get mixed into here because that will really screw things up for me. And that will really set off my cortisol levels and I'll get fatter and fatter, which is to me the important part. But the fact that I've been able to do writing as well tells me that we're going somewhere here. And I bring this up because for I think it was nearly 2 months ago, we started to break stories about the in our investigative series called Behind the Bid, which is our look into irregularities, possibly even scandal involving the selection of Cortec International as the developer for the new Simon Sanchez High School and everything that has happened since that determination, whether it was negotiation meetings, and we played those. We played all five of the publicly available taped recordings of those negotiation meetings, or the presentation of information based on documents that we've been able to unearth in the behind the bid investigative reporting that we've been doing. It got interrupted by one issue after another. The GVB issue. There was so many things that have been happening, but over the past week, we've been able to just sort of like get it all together. And tonight, I have an update for you in our Behind the Bid series, and it focuses on a number that recurs over and over in those taped recordings of the negotiations, and the number is $16.3 million. Together, what it represents is more than $500 million of your money and my money. When we come back from the other side of the commercial break, I'm going to tell you the story about how senators on both sides of the aisle did not know what the administration truly was asking for. They were sold a bag of tricks by the administration in the appropriation of that first $16.3 million. And this is I have to imagine, that if, what is the name of there's a developer that lost to Cortec, GPS, that at some point GPS is going to protest this as well, because this is where the insanity truly is. Stick with us on the other side of the commercial break. I'll get right to it.
Imagine Guam led by proven and effective leaders. Leaders with a record of service and success in lifting our island and her people from challenges and hardships that continue to plague our families and neighborhoods. The leaders we choose this election will make the difference between harder times or a safe, prosperous, and peaceful Guam. Frank Blas Jr. has led Guam out of difficult times throughout his career as a police officer, to his role as Guam's Homeland Security Advisor and as your Senator and Speaker. And now, as our Governor, he will once again lead the charge to clean up our streets, protect our families and businesses, put drug dealers away for a long time, and let the region know that Guam is open for business once again. No other candidate can protect our people like Frank Blas Jr. Vote Frank Blas Jr. for Governor and Dr. Mary Okada for Lieutenant Governor. Tested, trusted leaders.
Welcome back to the evening show. This is the Troy Torres Show on Kandit News. My name is Troy Torres. It is now 7:41 p.m. on June 14, 2026. Happy birthday to my younger sister, Tiara. I don't know how old she is. I think she was born in 1995, which would make her 31 years old. Yeah, right, 31. You know, the younger kids, the younger siblings, like I come from the end of the older kids generation, the older kids era, and then there's our younger siblings. Like there is a very contrasted divide where us older kids, Tammy, Brian, and myself, we were abused by the adults. They were much more strict. Our dad was much more strict on us. When we saw our dad raising, how he's so nice to our younger siblings, we were like, where did you come from? Like, who repossessed your body and like made you a nice person? Because this is not why are you checking their math homework like that? Why are you being nice? That's not right. Why aren't you spanking them? How you don't believe in spanking now? You sure as heck believed in spanking with that leather belt and whatever you threw at us when we were kids. And of course, those of us who are older, would like to say things like, and we turned out just fine, but we didn't. We really didn't. Anyway, just a little humor as we get into a heavy topic. So the I guess I should rewind this and start with at least a summary of this whole thing, right? So here's the Cliff's Notes on the whole Cortex Simon Sanchez High School thing. Back in 2014 or something like that, the government first made a promise that they were going to build a new Simon Sanchez High School. It followed protests. There was a whole political thing. There was a promise made. That was in the Calvo administration. For the second half of the Calvo administration, Governor Eddie Calvo was unable to build the new Simon Sanchez High School because it went out for bid. They put it out to bid. A developer won, and then the developer who did not win protested. That was, at the time, the developer who did not win was Cortec. So it got thrown out. To make a long story short, all of these years later, in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, then Senator Roy Kinata introduced the Makahat Act of 2023, which was a revision to the original authorization sponsored by Judy Wampat back in 2014, called the Makahat Act. 2013, I think. So this new Makahat Act allowed for certain political hires, and I don't know why the legislature did this in 2023, why they said that the evaluating committee was going to be made out of all of these appointees of the governor. It's really crazy to me that they allowed all of these political appointees to be the people to make these decisions. But they made this evaluation committee in the law, and all of these political appointees were the ones who decided what type of procurement it was going to be and what the RFP said when they finally put a procurement out in an RFP out in January or February, somewhere there, of 2025. Okay, so this evaluation team, they make this, and they have a design, by the way. There's a design that was created back in like 2021 or something like that by Taniguchi Ruth Macchio Architects. It is separate from the development. There's even something else that's separate from both the design and the development, and it's a construction manager. The construction manager is SS something. I can't remember the name of it. That's not critical to this discussion tonight. But there's a construction manager. So there is a design that was made by TRMA back in 2020, 2021. By the time 2023 comes, construction costs had gone up. And so there was the understanding that whatever the architect designed might need to be whittled down, or there might need to be some whatever, right? And so by the time the RFP comes out, there is an even greater understanding of increased construction costs. So the evaluation committee, this is where they're like, okay, whoever is bidding on this will need to have a design element as well, because they're going to need to whittle away at the original design, because there's not going to be enough money, because the legislature set 3 caps on this thing. The first cap is a all-in principal financing cost of $166.3 or $166.7 million. That's the first cap. The second cap is an interest rate at no more than 8.5% interest on the annual debt service. And the third cap is annual debt service at 30 years of $16.3 million. This is the most important portion. This is the most important cap that was given. So in the RFP, the companies making their proposals had to abide by each of those caps. If they went over those caps, they were disqualified, non-responsive. If you provided options on those caps, you are disqualified. You're non-responsive. That's how it was supposed to be. So that was the legislature's control on costs, right? If you do $16.3 million, the legislature knew this when they passed the McCahon Act in 2023. $16.3 million at 30 years, $489 million. So the legislature in 2023 was already crazy, unless those senators just didn't do the math, unless none of them went to a calculator and put 16.3 million times 30 in order to yield the 489 million. Then they couldn't tell you. I mean, it's just such an insane amount of money for one building when you think about it, right? But the legislature, they're like, okay, that's the cap. You cannot go beyond that. So it doesn't mean that you couldn't go below it. It was just the cap, right? And so by this RFP, and let me explain something else. The mechanism is a lease back. So essentially, you're talking about 32 years, because what the legislature said is we will lease the property, the Simon Sanchez property, to the developer for no more than 2 years. Developer, you have 24 months from the start of this project to construct and deliver a completed, ready-to-occupy Simon Sanchez High School. So that's year 1 and year 2, 24 months, right? That's the lease period. And then on year 3 to year 32, there's a lease back period that would commonly be known as the 30 years. And during the lease back period, that's where the developer would would essentially own the property for the 30 years. It's a leasehold. And the government of Guam would lease it back from the developer. And it would lease it back at whatever the debt service is. And so the legislature said no more than $16.3 million for those 30 years, year 3 to year 32. Those are the 30 years, which would equal $489 million at the cap. There's something else that needs to be explained, and that is the $166.7 million. The $166.7 million in total price includes, it's the all-in principal of whatever bond is floated, which would include the cost of insurance and maintenance and something called capitalized interest. Okay, let me explain what capitalized interest is. And let me plug this in. Let's say you want to buy a house and you don't have any down payment. If you go to a good financing person, they can structure something that you would be able to take to the bank where if you wanted to buy a $250,000 house and you did not have $50,000 for the 20% closing costs, you could borrow that money to pay the closing costs. So it becomes part of the loan. Capitalized interest follows a similar concept. So you're going to take the bond out at the beginning of the project because you need the money in order to do the construction. But you're not going to be able to start making any money from the government that's going to lease it back to you until the third year, until after the 24 months is up. You still need to make payments on the bond on the first 2 years. So capitalized interest is the amount of money that is pledged in those 2 years. It's essentially the $32 million. So you subtract that out and you get whatever cost, right? Or maybe it's even less than that. And, part of the capitalized interest, if not all of the capitalized interest, goes to making those payments in the beginning. So the actual amount available for construction, according to the legislature's cap, is actually less than 166 point whatever that amount is, right? It's going to be 140 something or 130 something million dollars. All right, now that you know all of that, in June of 2025, the evaluation committee looks over 3 offers that come in. One offer is deemed to be non-responsive, leaving 2 offers. One is GPS and one is Cortec. They do not score price. Pricing was not part of the scoring rubric. It was all this other stuff. Basically, your qualification, your past performance, and all this stuff. GPS, according to GPS's affidavits, was only 2 points lower than Cortec on a scoring sheet of 0 to 100 points. There's only a 2-point difference. Cortec, because they were ranked higher, they move on to the negotiation phase. The negotiations begin with the government of Guam and Cortec acknowledging that Cortec's price was $195 or $196 million, placing it $30 million above the price cap, which should have already been declared non-responsive. But for whatever reason, the government continues on with its negotiations with Cortec. And as you listen to these negotiations, something becomes increasingly clear. That price is irrelevant. What the 166 or the 196 or 108 or 80, whatever the price is, in terms of how the taxpayers are affected by this, is completely irrelevant. And if you listen to all of these tapes, what you're going to see is an increased focus on one number that never changes the entire time, and it's $16.3 million every year for 30 years or every year for 32 years. Throughout the entirety of the negotiations, not one time did a government of Guam person sitting on that panel say or challenge the $16.3 million that Ho Yun was adamant about collecting during the 30 years, plus they call it year 31 and year 32, which is truly fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. They call it 31 and 32 because it's 2 years extra on top of the 30, but they're truly the first 2 years. And that's the only time you ever hear any sort of pushback from the government of Guam people. And it's not even all of them. It's really just Lester Carlson and at times Ed Byrne, who, when Ho Yun brings up, okay, pay us for all 30 years, $16.3 million. That's already $489 million. But when Ho Yun pushes and says, okay, we can do this, but we're going to need $16.3 million in fiscal year 26 and another $16.3 million in fiscal year 27, that was the foundation of that claim. Remember the thing where they were talking about having to donate more money to senators? It was because of the need to put the $16.3 million into appropriations in fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. Fiscal year 27 does not arrive until October 1 this year. And these conversations were happening in the summer of 2025. But what was happening during the summer of 2025 was budget deliberations for the fiscal year 26, the current budget. And what did make it in to the fiscal year 2026 budget is an appropriation of $16.3 million for Simon Sanchez High School. I've gone back and I've listened to the public hearing, to the session remarks, to the committee of the whole, to all of this different stuff, right? And if you want to accuse senators of anything, it might be either being too gullible or not asking the right questions, or maybe even you can go as far as not understanding what it is that they were doing. And Ho Yun makes it a point in those tape negotiation meetings to laugh and make fun of senators for not knowing what it is that they were doing. And the members of the negotiating committee, they laugh along with that assertion by Ho Yun. And there might be some truth to that. I don't know. There might be some senators too, but there are a lot of smart senators too. Right. And so it's how did this get past the senators? Remember, this is the summer of 2025. We did not know about the negotiations or the taped recordings until a few weeks ago. We did not play them. These senators, they never heard these taped recordings until just a few weeks ago. And what they were told back in 2025, the summer of 2025, about that money was that, oh, this is just to speed things along. This is to make the construction of Simon Sanchez High School happen faster. And the pressure was coming from Governor Lulian Guerrero and Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio. And they were the ones, and Adelup was pressuring the senators, oh, if you don't vote for this, then you don't want to build Simon Sanchez High School. Hot political topic. Who was going to question that at the time, especially when the public was unaware of all the machinations that were happening behind the scenes, behind closed doors, but thankfully was recorded. Because now we know from those recordings that $16.3 million, the appropriation for fiscal year 26, was on top of the $16.3 million that GovGuam was ready and willing to give Cortec every year for 30 years. And then another $16.3 million in fiscal year 26. And we'll have a story about this published maybe tonight if I'm not too tired. And then I have another story to publish about what the government of Guam intended to do with fiscal year 27. But altogether, more than $500 million, GovGuam, this administration, Lou and Josh, planned to give to Cortec, with at least two of those payments being made by selling to the legislature a bag of tricks, untruths about what that money was for. And this doesn't even begin to touch on the subject of violations of the procurement itself and the RFP, because according to that RFP was very specific. The financing, there was a cap of $16.3 million, and it was for 30 years. The companies who were making their offers knew that it was for the 30 years, and whatever the capitalized interest was supposed to be in order to afford, or in order to make the payments in the first 2 years, whatever, right? That's what they understood was the 30 years and the cap of $16.3 million. And if you believe GPS's assertions in their affidavit, when they say that they were proposing to build Simon Sanchez High School for like 80 or 88 or $89 million or something like that, you would have to imagine that the debt service on that would be far less than $16.3 million per year. So far less than $500 million over the term, and without figuring in, the first 2 years of 16.3 million times 2. And so I asked, because, what do I know about what's in the minds of senators at the time, right? So I asked two senators. I made sure to ask one Republican and one Democrat. The Republicans happen to be in control of the legislature now, with Chris Duenas as a Republican being in charge of the money. And he during this Makahat Act, and let's not forget that Roy Kanata sponsored this law, and Roy Kanata is asking for your vote for senator. He needs to answer some questions about where the hell this Makahat Act came from. Where did those numbers come from? Like, why are these the numbers, and why is this the system that you put together in this Makahat Act? Did anybody, Roy Kanata, ask you to introduce this bill or any of the language in the bill? And did any of this stuff come from Cortec or any associates of Cortec? I think Roy Kanata needs to answer these questions. Anyway, so back in the day, in 2023, Chris Duenas was a minority member. But if you listen to, or if you watch the session where this happened, he made some prophecies about that came true about what was going to happen today. And he had some concerns. So did Senator Chris Barnett, who was at the time the Education Committee chairman. He had some grave concerns about the Makahat Act and what everything meant. So I asked both of them, because they're on separate sides of the aisle. They don't always see eye to eye. And I asked them essentially, did you know? Did you know that this was an additional $16.3 million? Matter of fact, I asked those two, plus Senator Vince Borja, who's the current chairman of the Education Committee, but he has not responded to our questions. So I asked them, clearly in the 5 recordings of the 6 publicly known summer 2025 negotiations, both Cortec and GovGuam were set on paying Cortec $16.3 million for 30 years as the leaseback amount. That would have meant taxpayers would be on the hook for $489 million. My first question being to Barnett and Duenas, who were in the legislature at the time, was, when you voted on the Makahat Act, what was your understanding of that $16.3 million annual payment? Was it a cap? Was it a starting point? Was it inclusive of the annual payments for insurance and maintenance subject to negotiation? My second question is, what are your thoughts on the government negotiators never once attempting to negotiate the annual payment downward? The recordings also show a plan orchestrated by the government and Cortec to have the legislature appropriate $16.3 million in the FY26 budget and another $16.3 million in FY27 on top of the 30 years of $16.3 million annual leaseback payments. So the third question is, when you senators passed the FY26 budget, did you know that the $16.3 million appropriation you made for Simon Sanchez High School was to pay $16.3 million on top of whatever the 30-year leaseback term would be? What was told to you about this, and who said what? And if you didn't know this to be the case, then what did you believe that $16.3 million was for? And the final question is, did anyone from or for Cortec promote that fiscal year 2026 appropriation to you? So who? What did they say? Did anyone from or for Cortec talk to you about making another $16.3 million appropriation for Simon Sanchez in the fiscal year 27 budget? How about from the administration? Who? What did they say? And so we didn't get a response from Senator from Senator Vince Borja. But the first response that came in was from Senator Chris Duenas. And this is what he said. When I voted for Bill 94-37, which amends the Makahat Act of 2013, my understanding was that the $16.3 million annual payment was a cap and that could not be exceeded. It was my understanding that this figure was intended to serve as a guaranteed payment amount or a starting point for negotiation. The intent was to establish a ceiling for the annual debt service obligation and to protect taxpayers from any agreement that would go beyond what the legislature authorized. As to why there was no apparent effort by government negotiators to negotiate below that cap, I cannot speak for the administration or the negotiating team. However, from my perspective, any appropriation made by the legislature for this project was understood to be for debt service and part of the total financing structure over the authorized term. That's the 30 years. I would have expected any negotiation to pursue the best possible value for the people of Guam, including efforts to reduce the annual obligation where possible. Regarding the FY26 budget appropriation, my understanding was that the $16.3 million was necessary to allow the project to move forward and go to market. I did not understand that appropriation to be an additional payment on top of the 30-year leaseback obligation. In fact, during this current special economic service hearing, I asked Mr. Lester Carlson whether the money was still available, and he confirmed that it was. Based on that exchange, there has been no current expenditure from this funding source. Well, there can't be. The whole thing's in protest appeal. My communications on the need for the FY26 funding were with BBMR. The discussion was centered on the need for funding to take the project to market. There was some mention of pre-construction costs, but it was not presented to me as an additional funding obligation separate and apart from the authorized debt service structure. To be clear, I have always handled this issue in accordance with the law and based on the information provided to the legislature at the time. My focus has been and continues to be ensuring that the Simon Sanchez High School project moves forward in a lawful, transparent, and fiscally responsible manner while protecting the taxpayers of Guam. That's Senator Chris doing it. Senator Chris Barnett wrote this. As the former chair of education in the 37th legislature, I voted for the Makahat Act in good faith after administration officials said the bill would offer a simplified procurement process for the Guam Department of Education combined with technical expertise from the Department of Public Works. However, I did caution at the time that we should be mindful and vigilant going forward, making sure we keep an eye on the cost and the value for the Sharks and for our taxpayers. It looks like that warning has come to fruition, and it also looks like the Makahat Act wasn't all Adelup chalked it up to be. It's disappointing Adelup officials seem intent on finding ways to increase the cost of Sanchez. It looks like the administration is putting special interests and political patronage ahead of the Simon Sanchez Shark family, and that's why we haven't seen the campaign promises to build Sanchez they made in 2017 come true, even after 8 years in office. I voted no on the budget for fiscal year 26. I have not met with Cortec officials or representatives. Sincerely, Chris Barnett. I don't know what else to say about this that isn't glaringly obvious to all of you who I know are reasonable, thoughtful people who can be objective in thinking about this. I mean, I suppose, you know, because we're one and the same, right? I suppose I'd be preaching to the choir if I said this thing stinks to holy hell, that there is no way in anyone's reasonable mind that anyone's going to think that the government of Guam, that Governor Luliang Guerrero and Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio's surrogates who were in that negotiating room had the people of Guam's interest in mind, except for when those times when Lester Carlson and sometimes Ed Byrne protested about every time Ho Yun wanted more. Every time he wanted to cut down more from the school design in order to meet the $16.3 million and to push year 31 and year 32. At the very least, there was Lester Carlson, right? But everybody else was just willing to give that up. And even Lester and Ed Byrne were willing to give up the $16.3 million for the entirety of the 30 years, putting us on the hook for $489 million. When now we know that the second-ranked offerer was offering to build this school for far less, which we have to imagine the debt service would be far less than $16.3 million, which is the only amount of money that matters in this, because that's the actual cash outlay in this thing. That's the money that we, the taxpayers, are actually going to pay. Those other two numbers are incidental to the $16.3 million. And the fact that the administration, Governor Leon Guerrero, Lieutenant Governor Tenorio, and their surrogates who were in that room were willing to give all $16.3 million for 30 years. And then the Lieutenant Governor coming in at the end of this and saying, hey, I'm going to throw you guys into session so that we can force this development to begin, meaning all 30 years plus year 31 and year 32 for more than $500 million for this one building that they were so incompetent that for the past how many years could not fulfill this promise. And now we're the ones who are going to be on the hook for whatever political patronage is going on and all the incompetence of this administration. I cannot be the only person. I must be preaching to the choir, to all of you, when I say either move on to GPS or cancel this whole thing and redo it, and do not follow Roy Kenyatta's Makahat Act, which places all of this negotiating power in the hands of Governor Leon Guerrero and Lieutenant Governor Tenorio's surrogates so that they can get their grubby little hands into whatever this is. Because this was, my friends, a complete giveaway. If the legislature did not stop it this time around when Josh Tenorio was trying to push this thing through, this would have been an absolute giveaway to Cortec, a company that has already benefited so much from this administration. And it makes me sick, and I am disgusted by all of it. But you know what? The only way this is ever going to matter, the only way that this voice of ours is ever going to be heard, is if we collectively exercise that voice at the election. And the election is on August 1st. I cannot implore you enough, because I feel like if I talk any more about this issue and the $16.3 million, it's just, it's like a record on repeat. And I'm preaching to the choir because I have to believe that those of you who are listening to this right now, who are reasonable and even mildly objective, will agree with me that this whole thing just stinks. For Kandit News, I'm Troy Torres. Join me in the morning where we'll have whatever news I plan tonight to talk about tomorrow. But I definitely know that we're going to have Landon Eidlet from the National Weather Service on air with us tomorrow morning to discuss the latest on Invest 92W and see whether any changes have happened since this morning when we last talked to him. And, you know, hopefully the news that he has for us in the morning is that this thing is going away. I don't know. That's what I hope. For Kandit News, I'm Troy Torres. You all have a beautiful evening. God bless you. And good night.